Someday, I'm going to live in your house up on the hill, and when your skinhead neighbor goes missing, I'll record another episode of Columbia House Party. Jake, what's up, man?
Not much. How you doing?
Good. A little tough intro to not go a line further and admit on the pod that we're committing murder.
I mean, it wouldn't be entirely off-brand, I suppose.
Look, a song about killing a Nazi and burying him in the garden. Let's just put it out there right away. Killing may be bad, but if you want to punch one, by all means, we are
a pro-Nazi punching podcast.
Yeah, I would phrase that differently because depending on where the hyphen and the emphasis is,
That's
you may
true.
have just said we're a pro-Nazi podcast who punches. We are a pro-punching of the Nazis podcast. Little grammar lesson off the top, guys.
This is why you're the writer and I'm not.
Yes, and the fact that we are off the rails 1 minute in is why we have a guest today to keep us on track and hopefully rise the tide of the entire podcast. Jake, what's up, man? How are you?
I'm good. I just ate a burger, so I'm feeling energized and ready to sit down for an hour after eating a burger.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can't wait for 20 minutes into the podcast when that energy turns into lethargy and you've got the food sweats. And
well, that's why we have a guest to pick me up and I don't have to.
Yes, the antacid of the podcast, as it were. Did you make the burger or did you order in?
I know I made it. Well, I mean, I didn't make the patty, but I made I cooked it.
That's good. Do you guys have a balcony for a little grill?
We have a balcony, but we can't put a grill on it, which is a bummer. But oh well.
The barbecue in my little tiny front yard is probably the best part about this place.
Yeah, I like a lot of things about where we live. Not having a grill is one of the few that I don't, but that's okay.
You know, you've got a nice place with lots of plants and natural light. And
yeah.
We can't have all things renting in
true.
Toronto, as it turns out.
That's true.
As it turns out. All right. Today, we're doing our first somewhat instant analysis, taking a look at the Sophomore album from someone who has quickly become one of my favorite artists with my number 2 album of the last decade. It's an album that, while a favorite of mine, also requires us to tag in one of our favorite guests. Today, we're talking about Phoebe Bridgers and Punisher with Sarah MacDonald.
Emotional affair, overly sincere, smoking in the car, windows up, crocodile tears, run the tap till it's clear, drift off on the floor, I drag you to the shore, sweating through the sheets, you're gonna drown in your sleep, for sure. Wake up and start a big fire in a one-room apartment, but I'm too contest, all the bad dreams that we had, show me
yours. So that was Savior Complex, which is maybe my favorite track off of Punisher. We'll get into that in a little bit. And this is Sarah MacDonald. Sarah, how's it going?
Hi. So a few places to start. Let's start with the antacid of this podcast. I mean, I'm well, but you think I was going to just rest and not talk about that?
Yeah. I hope you're dressed in all pink right today too.
I'm wearing an Angel Olsen sweatshirt, so
excellent.
Absolutely not.
Oh, so it's
very,
it's
very
the cool antacid. It's like the Life brand antacid.
Yeah. Charcoal black antacid, Jake.
Oh, Jesus.
What a start.
Sarah, sorry for making you do this. We'll talk to you another time. I'm assuming you're going to hang up. First, we have to let everyone know, if you're new to the podcast or you forget or you just want a refresher, Sarah MacDonald is not only a friend of ours, she's better at this podcast than us, as the Discord is often letting us know after the Sarah episodes, and you can probably strap in for Sarah to roast us a lot during this episode. More importantly, though, Sarah's also a freelance music and culture writer, and one of my absolute favorites. She's had bylines pretty much everywhere: CBC Now, Vice Noisy, National Post, and more. So check her out on Twitter at Sarah S. MacDonald. Find her work at sarahsmacdonald.com, and Sarah also has a new music and culture newsletter that you can, should, and must subscribe to at cerulean.substack.com. Did I say that word right, Sarah?
Yeah, you did. You nailed it.
Okay. We will tweet out the link as well in case you don't know how to spell cerulean, hearing me say that. I know you're fairly early on in the relaunch, but how's the newsletter so far, Sarah?
It's good. I mean, first I'd love to address how your voice went up a little, like it was a question when you said friend. So like, I would love to unpack that at some point.
Well, I don't want to, give it to you. This is just like, you're coming on to push your newsletter, and, for you, this feels like doing us a favor or something like that. I could see, this is the thing, is like, I consider you a friend, but I'm always wondering, is someone else referring to me as like their colleague or their peer or some person from online? You never know.
It just feels like this. You guys give me an hour to bully you, and like that's it. And like lightly bully Jake. He gets out of this pretty unscathed.
That's just because we don't know each other as well.
That's true. But when I will roast you into oblivion.
Cerulean also, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know, is like a deep blue. So I know that the song is not deep blue, but I'm going to pencil you in for a Jack's Mannequin episode as well.
Oh, fuck you, man.
Is that too deep a joke?
That could have been an Arcade Fire reference too. But
ooh, there you go.
If you actually want to go deep, think Waxahachie. There you go.
Ooh. Yes, the topic of the very first newsletter.
Yes. She has the album Cerulean Salt, so there you go.
Excellent. That is not the album we're talking about today. We're going to talk about Phoebe Bridgers' sophomore album, Punisher. Sarah, I reached out to you to potentially do this because we were kicking around the idea of doing a newer album, and I think our listeners know how fond I am of Phoebe Bridgers. Why were you excited to come on and do this with us? It was a very, very quick yes.
I love to talk about sad music. Being a sad girl is one of my favorite things to be. So of all the episodes that I've been on, I feel like this one is my truest self. So yes.
Before we get into the specifics of the album, do you feel like it was an assault on all of us that Phoebe released this album with Mercury in retrograde right before Cancer season?
I don't know.
Do you see how much I'm learning?
I'm first of all, I'm very proud of you. I'm so proud. I actually Googled her natal chart beforehand just so I could have some specifics to pull up, which I think she would be proud of. But yeah, no, I think I was going to be like, I don't think Phoebe knows that. No, Phoebe would know that. Phoebe would 100% know that. So yeah, she intended to hurt all of us in a good way, which is what Cancer season is about. So,
which, we're going to unpack some of that. For me, Phoebe's quickly become a favorite of mine, and I thought Punisher, we'll get into the details of Punisher a little later, but to set it up, I thought it was a really notable and important and impressive step forward for her musically, and what resonates with me is the empathy and accessibility of what on the surface seems like very personal songwriting, which is a tough balance to strike. But we're going to also go into a little bit of how, me as a straight man, maybe there are some elements of those themes and her writing and her process that can't resonate with me the same way it resonates with someone with a different life experience. We're also going to talk about how SMH men on the timeline not being able to handle Phoebe Bridgers.
I think within like 30 seconds of her tweeting it, I sent you that like that she needs to do away with like men in bands. Like literally within 30 seconds of her tweeting it, I was like, Blake, this is number 1 on my list tomorrow.
Yes, we're gonna tee that up quickly. Jake, you feel a little differently about Phoebe than Sarah and I do. Give us a quick rundown of what you're hoping for in this episode, or why you were excited to do this one.
I find Phoebe kind of confusing in my brain, only as it relates to how I feel about her and her music, in that she's kind of an odd case where like I very much recognize that everything she does is excellent. And this one I like more than her previous work. But for some reason, it's never really hit me or connected with me that deeply, even though it's very much like in my wheelhouse, the kind of thing I enjoy, the kind of thing I should enjoy. And I've never been quite sure why. And I'm only more confused, lost, whatever you want to call it, after diving deeper into Punisher to prep for this, because I just don't understand why I'm not, because I know you're like, this is the best, my favorite album of the year, and this is so great. And like, it's weird in the sense, like, usually if we disagree on music, I can be like, oh, I don't, like, I would never pick that as my number one. But like, I totally get how and why you're picking this as your number one, but it just doesn't affect me at all. And I'm confused by it.
Well, we're going to try to unpack that. We're going to talk about Punisher after this. There are like so many things I want to hit on in this podcast, so we're going to breeze very, very, very quickly through the Phoebe Bridgers backstory to get to about 2016. We're not going to give you much. She was born and raised in California, graduated from LA County High School for the Arts. A lot of her interview clips and what she shared about her life suggest a bit of a music geek, and her Instagram and throwback posts certainly suggest either a goth background or someone who at least really loves Halloween. So that's all you need to know about Phoebe Bridgers until 2016, when she released a 7-inch debut called Killer on Ryan Adams' label Pax AM. A 2019 New York Times investigation into Ryan Adams subsequently showed a history of emotional abuse and vengeance toward women who had scorned him. Bridgers and Adams had dated in addition to collaborating. Sarah, I know this is part of Phoebe's kind of, I guess, origin story that you wanted to talk about more here, including things like Ryan Adams pressuring publications to take things that women in the industry have said down about him. And I think this tees us up well to kind of get into a pre-Punisher discussion of the gender dynamics of Phoebe's music. But first, I'll open it to you for the Ryan Adams discussion in particular.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know if you guys feel the same way about Phoebe. I mean, she's obviously undeniably talented and is amazing, but I wonder if her popularity has been so much more tied to this exposure of Ryan Adams because her voice was so prominent in that New York Times article, and because she was so clearly standing up for herself among the other women there. And I mean, like, I think Mandy Moore was probably the most famous of the people there, but that type of suppression that he is so clearly ignorant of, it just is so dismissive of women's work and the power that can happen when you're, I don't know. There are parts of Phoebe's work, especially when it's a Stranger in the Alps, that I can so cellularly feel, having been in similar situations as a woman where there are men telling me either I'm amazing or this and that, but also like trying to control everything and control that narrative and be on top of it all. And it's, I don't know. I when I think of Phoebe and Ryan, I really want to not think of Phoebe connected to Ryan Adams, if that makes sense. I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but I don't know if that they're undeniably tied together and how that narrative is going to follow her for the rest of her career.
Yeah, I think it's something that, the longer she's in her career and the more successful she is, I would hope she'll be able to get away from that. I think even something like her taking on more of a hand in the production on Punisher and it being so much bigger than the kind of stuff she was doing with Ryan Adams musically, I think already we've seen the separation, musically and lyrically. There's motion sickness on Stranger in the Alps, which is, kind of an all-time diss track, and we're going to play that in a second about Ryan Adams. But, I would think that, I shouldn't say I would think, because I know that logic doesn't always apply in these instances, and there will be parts of the industry who try to keep Phoebe tied to that, and keep kind of her own success and her own growth tethered to Ryan Adams' narrative. But I think, or what I hope is going to happen, is that as Phoebe becomes more commercially successful, and it's pretty clear that she's taken on a leadership role in the industry in terms of, you know, we've heard her collaborators in Boy Genius talk about this, and some of the other people she's collaborated with, just in terms of pushing feminism and just like kind of support for each other, knowing, you know, what risks and vulnerabilities there are for women in the industry. So I would hope that, you know, as sonically she gets away from the stuff she was making with Ryan Adams, and as commercially and media wise, you know, the story around what Phoebe Bridgers is doing and what she means to the industry becomes more and more separated from Adams. I would hope that those things become separate in time, but I realize that there may be a layer of naivety I'm applying there, you know, having not experienced that kind of thing directly, and how you can get kind of tethered to that, I guess.
I think the thing that is, when I'm thinking about it now, that the thing that I think will always forever be tied to her is that she will always have to be the voice of that like she has to be her own advocate. And that's the problem, right? That there are very few, like there are obviously the women in that piece. And then thereafter, like my favorite, Laura Marling, like she, you know, wrote about Ryan Adams and like performed with him and whatnot. And like during the cycle for her latest songs for a daughter, she was like, this is disgusting. Obviously, I believe these women. And it's just so easy to just like stop it there. But what is that it is so hard to untether the fact that if you are the one that is hurting, you have to be the one to step up to this person, and you have to weigh that risk. And she did, and she came out the other side of it. And like, that's not to say that all the things that he did to her before that will ever go away. But I'm just wondering, just at what point is the industry going to stop erasing women, but also completely like support and bolster them in these situations and not make them feel like they're going out on a limb?
Yeah, and I think your point about bolstering them, I think is an interesting one, especially when we relate it to the Burger Records stuff, and like how their solution was like, we'll just rename the label and like create an imprint. And like the imprint for female voices is great, and like they should do that, but that as a solution to this like widespread toxicity doesn't seem, it seems so I don't know if trite is the right word, but very like, okay, I guess we were bad, so now here's our like recompense for it. And I don't think that's truly like atoning.
No, it's pandering.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's something too that obviously this isn't unique to the music industry. You know, I'm in the sports media industry, and you see stuff like this come up. You know, there's a level of not only are you, you know, being preyed on or being a victim in the process, there's then this burden thrust on you. And I'm sure like more sensitive people don't make someone feel like they have to speak up or they have to lead that, you know, whatever movement it is. But there is a level of pressure there, at least once you decide to come out and talk about that, maybe that follows you. And maybe, you know, I'm sure at this stage, from all the interviews and sound clips, it sounds like Phoebe's fine playing that kind of leadership role. But yeah, if you look 5-7 years down the line and it's still the same kind of interview questions and she's still having to carry that same kind of weight, I would imagine that would get fairly frustrating.
Yeah, I was reading when I was doing research for this, like I read a recent article about how she wants to sort of be an example of like, she wants to be the performer that she wants to see in the industry. And I think like that's going to come with that responsibility of having to talk about an abuser and a toxic person like Ryan Adams. But I think if she does, I think it more honestly and urgently discusses the erasure that like there are so many other women who have not had that opportunity to do so. And that's obviously a lot of pressure to put on her to be like, you can speak for all the people who can't. And I don't think that that's her goal, but I think that the more that, she is honest in her work and takes a handle of like, I can be the one who's more in production, as so many women in this industry are, and be the one to say like, this is bullshit, which is also one of the best things about her, is that she kind of calls it as she sees it and in real time. And she can help fill maybe that crater that exists of, you know, women's voices that don't get to speak.
We're going to talk just a little bit more about this in a sec. I just want to play Motion Sickness off of Phoebe's debut album, Stranger in the Alps, for anyone who hasn't heard it, this is her song that kind of addresses the Adam situation a little fairly directly and humorously and sarcastically, but in a pretty biting way too. I wanted to ask you about, Sarah, and maybe this fits a little better in the actual album discussion, but we'll just bring it up here. We joked off the top about, Phoebe tweeting, society has progressed past the need for dudes in bands. And despite Phoebe Bridgers having this well-defined Twitter humor, there are people in the mentions and the quote retweets struggling in their response. There's obviously a big layer of irony there, it being called casual sexism in what I think was a serious way. But I wonder I've also seen some jokes about there was a meme going around that a friend of the podcast, Christina, posted that was a cartoon woman crying and with a very deep and nuanced explanation of why Punisher resonates with her. And then a dude in a Punisher shirt being oh, these lyrics in obviously a much more surface level way. And I'm wondering, do you think there is an element to appreciating Phoebe, or at least some of the lyrical themes there that is rooted in the gender dynamics, not just of the industry, but of how, the power dynamics that play out in relationships as well?
I think so, yeah. And I think what her appeal is that she is so much, she speaks so much for this moment and for the moment and of the moment that in my newsletter, I wrote that you can meme away the sadness, or you can at least deflect it. And I think you can do this here. And she kind of includes a little bit of that in her lyrics, but it's so soft and delicate. And I hesitate to use that towards women because I think delicate can sometimes be misconstrued as she's fragile or something. But that softness is so admirable. But yeah, I think that in the gender, that dynamic, I can see why it might be confusing for some dudes that in that meme or whatever, but it just feels so perfect that's the reply about her music in a meme form. It feels like it doesn't fit for many other people, maybe Mitski, maybe, but she's so not of the internet the same way that Phoebe is. I feel like she was born from all of our insane memeable thoughts, and it's just a collection of those images, not to flatten her or anything, but I think that's her superpower as a performer.
Yeah, the Millennial Falcon, as she was on Twitter for a really long time.
Oh, fuck yeah.
So we'll talk about those themes a little bit more, I'm sure, when we go get into some of the songs on Punisher. But just to round out the pre-Punisher Phoebe, Motion Sickness was the third single off of her debut studio album, Stranger in the Alps, which was released in September 2017. And as I noted off the top, was my number 2 album of the last decade, as we discussed on a Patreon bonus episode. That album title, by the way, is a reference to The Big Lebowski, as she confirmed to Bandcamp Daily, where the actual line in the movie is, "Do you see what happens when you fuck a stranger in the ass?" But the line is then edited for TV to, "Do you see what happens when you find a stranger in the Alps?" Which,
I've never seen The Big Lebowski, so this is new to me.
I'm so happy that's actually the reference, and it is that.
Yeah,
that makes me like it so much
Big
more.
Lebowski is good if you like dry PI kind of source material, because it kind of plays on a lot of that, on a lot of the PI novel kind of tropes. So yeah, there you go. Anyway, Stranger in the Alps was pretty well received. Got a 7 from Pitchfork, an A- from Consequence of Sound, an A from AV Club, with a lot of the press around it being She's Coming. John Mayer said this is the arrival of a giant. She got heavy rotation guesting on songs and on tours. She had 2 side projects between albums, which we're going to talk about at the end, where we normally talk about kind of what's happened since the album, because nothing's happened since the album yet. But those side projects are Better Oblivion Community Center with Connor Burst and Boy Genius with Julian Baker and Lucy Dacus. So the expectations were quite high heading into Phoebe's sophomore album, Punisher. Phoebe told Office Magazine on whether those side projects helped ease the pressure on the sophomore album. She said, hopefully, yes, that's part of it. But I also feel this pressure because I've been so busy that now all I have to do is isolate and write and make sure that what I put out is good. So it's kind of terrifying because I'm not used to not doing anything. Now it's really time. I have all kinds of fears about it that I hope I can get over. Putting something out that people don't like as much as those 2 projects or whatever, or being stressed and writing something shitty. I feel like I struggle with wanting something out more than I want to make something. I think a lot of musicians do. And Sarah, before we get into the specifics of the album, I know that this kind of the sophomore album narrative was something that you found really interesting in the lead up to Punisher and in how you've digested it since.
Yeah, I think this is the record that she'll be remembered for more than anything. I think this is the one that sort of solidifies her status as like a certifiable like performer in a way that I don't think some other musicians have kind of reached. I think it took I'm talking about like new ones, like Mitski, for example. And I don't mean to keep comparing, but that's a more relevant example. But like it took Be the Cowboy for her to kind of get to the position that she's in, and like having a tour with Lorde. And Phoebe was supposed to go on tour with the 1975, which I, for the life of me, will never get. And I do not like them, but
welcome.
Anyway, sophomore albums, always a curse. But yeah, no, I think on this record, you really hear the benefit of having done those side projects with Lucy and Julian and then Connor, and having all the connections that she has in the industry. And it has made, I think, for far sooner than other artists of like in her kind of category and caliber, kind of like definitely like catapulted her up into a level of visibility. But it is also not just because she's a personality, but because the work is there, the value is there. Like there's something that you can kind of sink your teeth into. And I don't think that, not a lot of artists get that. I don't know if the sophomore slump is something that people pay attention to anymore, or if it's just me and I'm continuously thinking about all of the slander against Room on Fire. So
I'm going to use that opportunity to slide in the clip here of the final song on the album. And I want to talk about the album structuring a little later on, but when you talk about how much Phoebe grew and how much bigger this album is than Stranger in the Alps, I think I Know the End is maybe the best example of that in the way the album builds to it.
Somewhere in Germany, but I can't place it. Man, I hate this part of Texas. Close my eyes, fantasize. 3 clicks and I'm home. When I get back, I'll lay around. Then I'll get up and lay back down. Romanticize a quiet life. There's no place like my room. But you had to go. I know, I know, I know. Like a wave that crashed and melted on the shore. Not even the burnouts are out here anymore. I gotta go now. I know, I know, I know.
I love that song so much.
It's so great. It's what like an all-time album closer, the way everything kind of builds to it, and it's just so vast.
Especially for this moment when we're all like stressed out and feeling so much, to be able to scream and
yes.
just it's very cathartic.
Yes. Me listening and not wanting to ruin Phoebe's vocals by singing the song, but then at the end I just get to do the Connor So heading into the production of this album, Phoebe had been pretty open about wanting to be more experimental and, in her words, steal from as many places as possible. She had called her approach to instruments novice in a way that helps her not overthink things, and she stumbles into some things, which is cool. And I think, Sarah, to your earlier point, the number of people she's collaborated with really helps to kind of expand the sort of universe she's writing and performing within. This album has appearances from Conor Oberst, Morgan Agler, Christian Lee Hudson, Marshall Vore, Julian Baker, Lucy Dacus, Jenny Lee Lindbergh, Jim Keltner, Tony Berg produces it, Nick Zinner's on it. So she does get to, whether consciously or through her collaborations, get the pull from all sorts of different places. And then it was recorded at Sound City in Van Nuys, which she referred to as a magical place. So you get a little bit more there too. We're going to dive into Punisher finally, 40 minutes into the podcast. After this. All right, so the first thing that stood out to me about tackling a new album for this podcast, and you guys will find this just so off-brand for me, is that I wanted to include everything and just include way too much in the podcast and throw everything at it.
That doesn't sound like the Blake I know.
Get out of here.
It doesn't sound like me. It certainly doesn't. So I'm going to need to lean on you guys to rein me in a little bit here as we go through the songs and make sure that I don't end up with this being like a 3-hour podcast, because we could go through it that way. The album was rolled out with Garden Song and Kyoto as the first two singles, and then I See You as a single as well, ahead of a June 19th scheduled release. Bridgers moved up that release to June 8th and urged her fans to donate to racial justice organizations because the album release was scheduled to fall on Juneteenth. She said, "I'm not delaying the record until things go back to normal because I don't think they should." Throughout the pandemic, Phoebe has used her platform very responsibly to urge her fans in those directions, and she's done donations herself. So kudos to her for that. As we discussed, there were heavy expectations coming in for this one. And there was also an element of, while she started writing some of these songs before Stranger in the Alps was released, some of these recordings go back as far as the summer of 2018, and the writing goes back even further. There are elements lyrically that touch on the success of Stranger and how she dealt with that. She said, "Too much. It's a lot about disassociating and having everything you ever wanted happen to you. It's just a weird thing to complain about. So I feel like I internalize it, and then I write about what I internalize." So yeah, it's a lot about that. Obviously, that's a little bit of a complicated way to unpack her songs. But Sarah, when you listen to this album and you dive in, in terms of lyrical themes, I know it goes in a number of different directions, but what stands out to you most about Phoebe's songwriting on Punisher?
So between Stranger in the Alps and Punisher, I feel like it's a lot more focused. It's a lot tighter. I feel like the way that it's written is much more in, obviously, like a pop vein. But I think at the same time, it just cuts to the quick a little bit more. Obviously, you can kind of hear her influences a little more, like Elliott Smith and Connor. And I made a note. I don't know where I put it, but there's a chord on one of the songs that sounds like a Cure chord. I don't know where. I think it's probably a note in my phone. But just like there are parts of it that I think lyrically that it just collapses you in the best way possible. And that's all I look for in a record about interior sadness and 2 years worth of metabolizing that.
You mentioned too the Elliott Smith influence. She double tracks her vocals, which she says is a tribute to him directly. So not only a spiritual influence from Elliott Smith, also like a quite literal production technique from Elliott Smith.
I think that in trying to figure out why this doesn't connect with me like some other stuff does, I think it might be sort of that Elliott Smith-esque thing, because I've never been a huge fan of his either. While also, I know.
You know what? Phoebe Bridgers, like her marker of if she's gonna like you or trust your opinion is if you like Elliott Smith or not.
I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. And like, again, I recognize that that his music is excellent, and it's not that it's not good, but I've never liked that sound, I guess. And that being said, while I feel that a little less with Phoebe than I do with Elliott Smith, but when you go to like the lyric pages of these songs, and even like, and just right off the bat with Garden Song, it's like her lyrics are so good. And they really do have a way about them and a delivery about them and a cadence to them that I do think is a wholly unique thing in the industry right now, because her lyrics are deserving of that songwriting praise that they are getting. Because I think for me, who never really dug deep into her music until this week, that's what I will take from it. And that's what I think is so like powerful and interesting about her music.
I want to expand on that in 1 second, but Sarah, I just want to confirm, if we eventually get Phoebe on for an Elliott Smith episode, are you available to sub in for Jake as co-host that week?
Yeah, totally. 100%. Yeah. He can just,
thank you.
I mean, hopefully we can all see each other and he can just like peer in while it's just the three of us just talking about Elliott.
Yeah. Just tapping on the window.
I mean, everyone wants Sarah to replace one of us anyway. Might as well just
both of us. I feel like people love the idea of the podcast and want like a Sarah Lauren team up.
Who wouldn't want a Sarah Lauren team up? To be honest,
I can't wait for Lauren and I to have this podcast. Thanks so much for gifting it to us, guys.
Yeah. All right. In terms of the songwriting, it's. I like that you guys have highlighted that, because it's something, her process is something Phoebe's really open with, so we can learn a little bit from it. Sarah, you mentioned kind of how direct it is on Punisher relative to Stranger in the Alps. As Phoebe told Office Magazine, every time I've written my best music, it's because I went, what if I just didn't think about it and said what I actually think? Like, what if I stopped trying to veil something in poetry and just said what's happening? And every single fucking time, I'm like, you can't do that until I do it, and then it's done immediately. And I feel like, why do I have to go through that every single time I write music? But I do. So I think there's this element of like her trying to approach things poetically, but then when she just gets like more literal, she just like, I imagine her inner monologue is just so poetic as it is.
Yeah.
And when it's almost just like an element of like, just get out of your way and write. And, you know, that gets complicated in some spots on the album, but it also makes for some really, really interesting songs. And I think a good example of that is Chinese Satellite, where Phoebe tries to navigate kind of wishing she could make the religion jump and just not getting there. This is Chinese Satellite.
I've been running around in circles, pretending to be myself. Why would somebody do this on purpose when they could do something else? Drowning out the morning birds with the same three songs over and over. I wish I wrote it, but I didn't, so I learned the words. Hum along till the feeling's gone forever. Took her tour to see the stars, but they weren't out tonight. So I wished hard on a Chinese satellite, but that's impossible. I want to believe that if I go outside, I'll see a tractor beam coming to take me to where I'm from. I want to go home.
I know that's one of your favorite songs on the album as well, right?
It is. I love obviously like Garden down to Moon Song, but like the Chinese Satellite Moon Song just back to back like that. They're both such beautiful songs. And you're right. I think what she writes and how she thinks is poetic, because there's one of the ways that I talk to people about how to write or how to write a narrative is that like many people are like, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And there, I think, is a bit of there is a straight line, a linear thought in her work, but it isn't like that. And that's what makes it beautiful, because as ordinary as it is, as ordinary as her singing like that, she's looking at the sky and she feels nothing. And like you can picture that. Like I can picture myself looking at the sky and feeling nothing. And that amplifies, I think, whatever poetry she would have put in that place, like whatever beautiful thought she would have had, or like devastating thought. Like it just is devastating on delivery.
I think that's also kind of what I admire so much about her lyricism, is that ability to sort of go in and out of that poetic and then just like hit you with an extremely relatable fact, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like in Moon Song, where she's like, we hate Tears for Heaven, and like fought about John Lennon and cried, like things like that. Like I don't know if anyone fights about John Lennon. I do, but like things like that feel like you can, I don't know, like it is relatable, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And I think on his Instagram story, when the album first came out, Hanif Abdurraqib had a good point about, how this is such a strength of Phoebe's songwriting, in that, sometimes you listen to sad music and it brings you to a place where, you're kind of reflecting on your own emotions individually, or it feels like you're parachuting in kind of to someone else's struggle and their emotions. And with Phoebe, she somehow, the way she writes these songs, and whether it's the linearity you talked about, Sarah, or the way that she does kind of maybe almost lull you with literal lyrics before she hits you with the bigger punches. It's almost like she brings you along with her through it a little more delicately and like a little more meaningfully than some other writers who writes more sad songs do. And I'm obviously not saying this as well as Hanif did, because I don't write about these things or speak about these things as well as Hanif does. But there's another one people would love to be a co-host on this show.
He's such a sweet person. I had dinner with him with Anne Donahue last year, and just like him and his partner are like just like the sweetest, smartest humans that you could. I lured them to a hotel bar because the Houston Rockets were staying there, and I was like, oh my God, maybe we'll see them again. And he went along with it, and just like it was very, very nice of him.
That's amazing. I saw he was posting the other day in a Carly Rae Jepsen LA Kings jersey from when she performed at the All-Star game, the NHL All-Star game. And just like how anyway, this podcast turning into people we like better than us to host the podcast is I feel like we're staying in the lane of relatability and struggling through your own art, but I feel like it's maybe derailing us a little bit. Sarah, something you mentioned earlier was Chinese Satellite and Moon Song being like kind of a 1-2 for you, and this is actually something that I found very almost immediately when listening to the album, but especially when I would think of, kind of when you listen to an album for the third or fourth time and you start to anticipate what's coming next, and you almost like you build for what's coming. I feel like this album is structured almost as like 5 2-song couplets. Like Garden Song and Kyoto in my head are a pairing. I think Savior Complex and ICU are a pairing in my head. And then Chinese Satellite and Moon Song are a pairing in my head. And I don't know if that is intentional or not, but I don't know. Did either of you experience that listening to it? I feel like they're pairs of songs that are it's almost like 5 longer songs than 10 shorter songs. I don't know. It's stuck out to me the way I continue to process the songs in pairs.
That's interesting. I didn't actually think of it like that. But maybe like Punisher and Halloween. But yeah, no, I think I can kind of see that here. I mean, Chinese Satellite obviously has a stronger religious kind of vibe to it. But then there is something, I'm looking at the lyrics for Moon Song. I just love it so much. It's so anchored in a very specific moment of being with somebody. And I'm thinking out loud as you made that point, but I think it's very interesting to see how those two would connect.
You asked to walk me home, but I had to carry you. And you pushed me in, and now my feet can't touch the bottom of you. And if I could give you the moon, I would give you the moon. You are sick and you're married and you might be dying, but you're holding me like water in your hands. When you saw the dead little bird, you started crying, but you know the killer doesn't understand.
In terms of how those songs connect, I think it's more of like the sound and kind of the softness of those two songs. Obviously, thematically, they're not the same thing, but I think it might even be more of a where I see the other. Like I think Punisher and Halloween are together in my head. I think Garden Song and Kyoto are kind of tie together, not only as the singles, but like the more like pop sensible songs on the album. And then Savior Complex and I See You are together in my head. So maybe Chinese Satellite and Moonsong just kind of fill a 2-song space between other pairs, but I think also just, they're a little softer. Moonsong seems to be a song that a lot of people have really gravitated towards, including Lucy Dacus, who told Entertainment Weekly, Phoebe is willing to go darker than most people. There were a couple of times listening to Punisher where my jaw dropped, like, are you allowed to say that? Specifically referencing the line you mentioned earlier, Sarah, we hate tears in heaven, but it's sad that his baby died. I was like, girl! But it gets to the point of what she's saying. Christian Lee Hudson commented on it as well in talking about Moonsong, but I think this is kind of a great summation of Phoebe's songwriting talent in general. She said, Moonsong is my favorite from her new record. It's just a fucking amazing song. The week after we met, when she came over to my house and we wrote Halloween, before we started working on that, she played all of Moonsong and was like, I don't know if it's done yet. This is the only new song I have. But can you imagine the characters in the song? It's specific, and yet you can put yourself in it easily.
Yeah.
So I think, not to again say people do the job better than us, but Lucy and Christian seem to, hit the nail on the head there with Moonsong.
It is. It like right from the first verse where she's talking about walking home with someone and like the line, and now my feet can't touch the bottom of you. Like I get chills every time I think of that. And it makes me feel like I'm a teenager again. I'm like walking in somewhere in downtown Kitchener with like this shithead. And it's just like, I'm trying to connect with this person. And like, and then in the next verse, when she's singing, like, stuck your tongue down the throat of somebody who loves you more, like, that's not just a teenage thing, but that it brings me back to that moment, because that's when that moment happened for me. And I think others might relate to it because those moments happened for them at other parts of their lives, but there's that universality of being let down by somebody.
And I think that's something, especially that first verse of Moonsong comes up again on Savior Complex, and this idea of, being leaned on and putting someone else first. And it comes up in Kyoto too. I know that she said that Kyoto is about her dad, not a significant other, but I do think that that's a thread that kind of runs through this too, is that idea of, maybe not to the extent of having a Savior Complex, but that dynamic in relationships, whether romantic or familial. Jake, when we've gone through those songs a little bit, I know, you know, your opinion on the album in general, but did any of the songs stand out to you in particular as ones you either liked or that resonated lyrically?
Yeah, I feel like oddly Chinese Satellite did, even though it's not really like any sort of, like you were alluding to sort of the religious allusions, I guess, in that song. And it didn't, which is obviously not an experience I have, but I do think that idea of, you know, like being, it sort of has like a younger feeling to me, which that idea of sort of belief in recognizing that there's probably nothing out there that's like listening to you or answering your prayers, so to speak, but trying anyway. And I think that's such a universal feeling, especially maybe for people who aren't particularly religious, and just like the I want to believe in the chorus there, or I wish so hard on a Chinese Satellite, I want to believe, that to me does, like, that's just such a real like feeling. And I think what so much of this album reminds me, not musically, but lyrically, and sort of the way some of it makes me feel, reminds me so much of like my most cherished Mountain Goats records. And I think it's interesting you were saying how you take it in the songs in pairs, where I actually found the opposite, in that I very much took it as like in 10 individual short stories, which is how a lot of like John Darnielle's writing makes me feel as well. And they're just sort of like universal ideas and feelings, but in sort of 10 different perspectives, even though they are from her perspective. Like, I don't think she's writing in like allegorical characters or anything, but I do find that Chinese Satellite was the one that when I was listening sort of the first time, and for albums that like maybe aren't my favorite, a way that I sort of gauge it is, you know, the one when you're giving it a first listen and then you have to stop and go check to see what it's called. And for me, Chinese Satellite was that one. I think Kyoto is really interesting too, just because it's sort of, I think it hews closer to, I guess, my literal musical taste, which is not to say I only want like the fast boppy songs, but that one is like, oh, okay, that's a nice song. And I also think I Know the End is probably my favorite off the album, but that's more from a musical perspective than a lyrical one.
Yeah, let's touch on I Know the End again. I know we talked about it earlier. I just have kind of a pair of quotes I want to wrap up the album here before we pivot out. Again, I'll go to Lucy Dacus in that Entertainment Weekly interview, and this is about the entire album, but I think is most evident on I Know the End. She said, Phoebe has become a great producer. She didn't really have as big a vocabulary for production. It wasn't as essential to her process, but I hope people give her credit for the creative decisions she made sonically. Phoebe, in that same Entertainment Weekly piece, said that I Know the End was the first song that she started working on for the album, as well as the last that she finished. And she said, it's just super fucking long, and it was challenging to write lyrics for it and have them be affected. I didn't want it to be corny. The more personal, intimate songs are easier for me. But I think it's, you know, that's gonna, obviously it's still a little too new to kind of historic perspective, but Sarah, to your point about how you think this is the album that she's going to be remembered for, I think that's going to have a strong case for one of the better album closers from this kind of generation of music, for sure.
Yeah, it also, like, if we're thinking of like these songs like in couplets the way that you are, just like jumping on that conversation, the only song that I felt like definitely felt split was I Know the End. Like, it starts out differently than it ends, and it felt like two different tracks to me. And right as she's singing, like as it's starting to like swell again and build, we're just talking about like the slaughterhouse, and where does that lyric go? Like driving out into the sun. Like right as soon as that verse starts, I'm like, oh shit! Like if they did a OC reboot, this would definitely be on there. Like right there. I don't want them to. Like I'm not advocating for a reboot at all. Let's just leave that in history. But that moment to me felt so cinematic, and I think that Phoebe's cinema, as I like to think of a lot of music, is very cinematic, is that ordinariness, is that that sense of like just walking down the street with your friends, shit talking and doing whatever. And you notice that the sky is like a candy color and like you want to capture that and the moon looks great or whatever. All these little things and they add up into this beautiful portrait. And it is the most apparent on this as she is doing something so interesting musically and really building and building and building towards something.
Okay, I'm going to round us out of the album now just because we've kept Sarah longer than I told her we would. As of this recording...
You're keeping me from a pizza that I'm about to make, so how dare you.
Wow, I'm very sorry.
Are we talking just like frozen, thrown in the oven, or are we doing a little from scratch action?
It's a from scratch. It's a squash and pancetta pizza, and I can't take credit for that. I buy a lot of food boxes, so it's from one of the delivery services. But I'm still making it with my own hands.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. Okay, it was extremely well received. It got an 8.7 from Pitchfork, a perfect rating from NME, 4 out of 5 from Slate and Rolling Stone, an A- from AV Club and Consequences of Sound, and it has a 90 on Metacritic. Again, she couldn't tour, but she was supposed to open for the 1975 on a stadium tour, including a night that I was going to try to go see Phoebe open for the 1975 at Molson Amphitheater and then rush over to the Pup Show, but both of those got canceled. Jeez. I have seen Phoebe live before. Sarah, have you seen Phoebe live?
No, I wanted to go see Boy Genius and I never, it sold out before I could. And I kick myself in the ass every time thinking about it.
That's tough. I saw her at the Velvet Underground, and then I saw her with Boy Genius.
What?
Yeah, she was amazing.
So tiny.
Yeah, this was like Stranger in the Alps had kind of like just come out, and I remember like watching because it was a Raptors game night, but I was trying to do both. I was like before her set. I forget who opened for her, but I was sitting like on one of the couches at the back of Velvet, like watching the end of a Raptors Magic game on my phone. And then the timing worked out very perfectly. So that was a nice night.
All of your interests in one night.
Yeah, it was perfect. And then I did see her with Boy Genius. So Boy Genius is Phoebe's side project with Julian Baker and Lucy Dacus. And they each did their own set and then did a set as Boy Genius, which was great. We mentioned earlier that Phoebe has had the Better Oblivion Community Center with Connor Burst. Boy Genius, that EP, a 6-song EP, was also excellent, including this song, which I know you really like, Sarah, Bite the Hand.
I can't hear you, you're too far away. I can't see you, the light is in my face. I can't touch you, I wouldn't if I could. I can't love you how you want me to. I can't love you how you want me to. I can't love you how you want me to.
So that's actually a Lucy song off of Boy Genius, not with Phoebe and Julian backing, which I thought was just like such a cool concept for them all to basically bring one solo track and one collab track to the EP sessions. What were your impressions of Boy Genius, Sarah?
Well, first of all, amazing band name.
Yes.
Just like off the top. I love dismantling the myth of male genius. So congratulations to Lucy, Phoebe, and Julian. But yeah, no, I felt like for six songs, it was really impactful. I mean, I think I wanted a full album, and maybe they'll give us a full album at some point, is my only hope. But yeah, I really, it felt like a nice, like the nice in between for all of their solo records, if that makes sense.
I'm a big Lucy fan, so Boy Genius was sort of a really nice, a good way for me to sort of attempt to get more into the other two, because I think Lucy is amazing.
Yeah, and Julian's great too. If they give us a full album, there are going to be like these online debates that the three of them don't care about whose songs are the best ones on the album. And it sounds like, you know, we talked about the gender dynamics at play with Phoebe in the industry. It sounds like Boy Genius has been pretty helpful in that regard, as well, the relationship that those women have, as well as Phoebe has referenced her relationship with Mitski, her relationship with Haley Dahl from Sloppy Jane, who she's tried to kind of like pass on some of that same help. And she said, it seems like there's a sense of community in a way that I had never felt, even in a mostly white boy LA music scene. Now that the world has opened up, it's actually not as dark and only these people get to the top. There are cool people everywhere who are supportive, you know? And again, another way she's passed that forward, she produced Christian Lee Hudson's record. She guests on Garden Song. So kind of, you know, it's creating kind of that supportive community within the industry. And I think Boy Genius, you know, is a great example of that. We are at the point in the podcast now where we have to rank our favorite songs for the album and pick one for the mixtape. Jake, I'm going to let you lead us off here. I know you said you kind of touched on it earlier, but why don't you give us your top three here, and then we could tell you why they're wrong.
That's fair. Yeah, I think my top three are the ones that I mentioned: Chinese Satellite, Kyoto, and I Know the End. I also really like Halloween. I think it's a really interestingly put together track, and the instrumentation on it's really interesting.
I'm just shocked it took us until Phoebe's fourth or fifth project, if we include EPs, to have a song called Halloween.
She's spooky.
Truly.
She loves skeletons and ghosts. Sarah, what about you? I'll open it to you here, and we normally defer to the guests for choosing the song for the mixtape anyway that best represents the album or our discussion. But what are your favorite tracks?
So, to detract a little bit, because I kind of threw you off there with
Of
picking
course.
Chinese Satellite as like one of my favorite songs, and it is. But my list would be Moon Song, Garden Song. Wait, oh my God, why do I not know this? Am I right? Yeah, Garden Song. There are two. There are two songs.
Two songs.
Okay. Moon Song, Garden Song, and I Know the End. Those are my top three, and all three of them deserve a spot on the mixtape. Even though I know we have to pick one.
We do have to pick one. I would say that my top three in some order are probably I Know the End, Moon Song, and Savior Complex. I know Savior Complex is a less popular pick there. But so it sounds like we're going probably either Moon Song or I Know the End. Those are the ones that have come up most often. Do you have a preference there, Sarah?
You know what? I'm going to be diplomatic, and I'm going to ask Jake to pick it. Because
I don't feel right about that.
You should.
Well, then
get uncomfortable,
you can sit with
Jake.
that.
Well, then I'm going to pick I Know the End, because I think it's
And that's the correct answer.
I think it's such an interesting. I don't always believe this, but I believe that sometimes artists who are sort of on the edge of like severely blowing up sometimes end their breakthrough records with hints of what's to come. And I'm not saying by any means she's doing that or intentionally at all, but I hope she is, because a whole album of her lyricism and songwriting with how interesting I think I Know the End is as a song is something I would very much be into listening to.
All right. I Know the End makes the mixtape then. We were going to have a sub-discussion about how Phoebe's fandom is kind of so central to her work. We did get into it a little bit earlier with the Elliott Smith influence. Obviously, she's, you know, in working with Julian and Lucy, she's pulled some. She did that Christmas song with Jackson Browne, which must have been really cool. She's worked with Matt Berringer and Fiona Apple. As she told NPR, like they say, steal from as many as possible so that you're not just stealing from one person. I think that what's beautiful about music, everybody's stealing from each other. Lyrically, I steal from a couple people and try to pass it off as a reference. I have a Rebel Without a Clue line, which is a Replacements line that Tom Petty already stole, which is hilarious. So I'm just stealing it again, which is also something that we've had come up with John K. Samson stealing something that was stolen from Neil Young. So steal back this is some Robin Hood music stealing here is what we've got going on. But I think that's a fun perspective from Phoebe and a good way to round it out. We have our song for the mixtape. And Sarah, thank you. This was a lot of fun. We appreciate you coming on as always.
I miss seeing your faces and roasting you in person, so I can't wait until the day that I can do that. And thank you so much for...
When we get all red and flustered.
It's amazing!
Now we just get flustered in our homes.
Yeah, you're like, I'm protected here, but am I? Thank you so much for having me on, as always, and to all of the people who roast Blake and Jake and try to bully them into having Lauren and I on all the time. Please continue to do so.
Yeah, it's what the podcast is about. For like 10 to 15% of what the podcast is about. And guys, check out Sarah at Sarah S. MacDonald on Twitter and sarahsmacdonald.com, as well as her new newsletter, which is a music and culture newsletter available at cerulean.substack.com. We'll tweet that link out as well.